So last week, talked about discipline. And this week, I like to talk about commitment. So, anyway, I don't know if you like that or not, but I don't care. So, one thing about this particular way, this way of Zen, this way of Soto Zen, is there is a kind of emphasis on a regularity of practice. So that looks very different for different people. So for some people, that will look like coming to an assembly once a week on a regular basis. For some people, that will be taking up the daily meditation practice. For some people, that will mean living in a temple and having kind of your whole day, every day, articulated by the formalities of a kind of monastic or quasi-monastic type of living. So it's very broad, and it's not that one way is better than the other. All kind of flavors are important, but there is this emphasis that we commit to something, that we commit to life, not in the abstraction, but life as it is on the ground with the things that we encounter, and that the part of our tradition is really pointing us towards a return to that actuality of living again and again. And it pulls at a central kind of complex or karmic knot that we have around commitment. And just even saying the word commitment, I don't know what kind of karma you have around that word in particular, but it's pretty fraught. It's very fraught, even to use the word. Oftentimes we use it in terms of a romantic relationship. That's a place where it shows up a lot. Okay? But also shows up here when we're talking about practice, or we're talking about the exploration of a way of living, which has been handed down for some 2,500 years. To commit to practice, as Dogen Zenji will always remind us, there's no such thing as practice that is not also awakening. So it's not that we practice to become awakened, but that we practice awakening. And so this kind of commitment is not just a commitment to practice in the terms of like, well, I'm going to the gym every other day in the morning for this amount of time, although that's good. But there's a kind of too rigid of a mindset that we get into when we think about commitment. Dogen Zenji, his real conviction that practice and awakening cannot be separated is important for us when we're exploring commitment. Because we're not just committing to the forms of practice, we're committing to awakening. We're committing to alivening. We're committing to life. And so this exploration of commitment, it should be fraught. It should be treacherous. It shouldn't be something that we go, oh yeah, it's easy for me to commit to things. If you're saying that, probably you're not actually committing to things, right? To commit to something is to realize that whatever form it may show up in this moment is a provisional understanding of something that's way beyond my grasp. And to commit to something that's beyond your grasp is to live. To be unwilling to commit to something that's beyond our grasp is to die. You can still be functioning, but you become isolated, and then you can't breathe in a metaphorical way, right? Or maybe a literal way. So this gateway of commitment, it's like this knife edge of rigidity and dullness that happens when commitment just becomes carrying out the form. That's on one side of the knife blade. And the other side of the knife blade is like, screw it. Right? You can't, the real thing can't be nailed down. So I should just follow my feeling. Right? I should just follow what feels inspiring to me at this moment. but where those two things come together, the inspiration, your own experience, the aliveness, and then the coming back to an embodied being, that's where the edge of practice really appears. I've been extremely lucky in many ways in my life, but I think one of the most lucky has been that I have had the good fortune of having many wise and committed elders and teachers, and that many of them have been part of my family. I'm speaking with some sadness now because my father-in-law, who's one of those people, passed away on last Thursday evening. It was Thursday here, Friday there. And he was an amazing man. And I've known him for, gosh, how old am I? Like almost 40 years. When my wife and I started to date, I was 17, she was 18, and I went to Japan for the first, I had been to Japan before, but after we started dating, I went to Japan for the first time after I just turned 18. I went to Sendai. I had lived in Tokyo before, but I had never been to Sendai, so I went to Sendai where she was from, and I met her family for the first time, including her father. It was amazingly generous to me. Even though I was coming under suspicious circumstance. Yeah. And it was, it was his time, so I don't feel sad that he's gone because his life wasn't full. He had a very, very full life. And he was just a vibrant, really vibrant being. Very, very different, he and I, in maybe character, that's not the right word. Well, I was much younger. Maybe we should just say that. And he taught me many, many things, but he taught me a lot about commitment. And he taught it to me, through his example as a father and as a husband. He was a medical doctor. He was a OBGYN. He delivered lots and lots of babies. In fact, the abbot who will perform his funeral this coming Tuesday, he delivered. Because his clinic was there in the part of Sendai. Sendai's a big city, and it's like Seattle or something. And they, my wife grew up kind of close to downtown, and her father, he started a clinic there with some other doctors, and it's right in this area where there's lots and lots of temples. And so he kind of delivering all the temple babies. So it's quite poetic that, coming in and going out, kind of arranged in that way. So very committed. He wanted to come visit us in the U.S. We lived here for a long time, but he couldn't come until he retired because he's like, I can't be away that long. He never traveled more than a day or two away from the hospital because of his responsibilities there. Even though there were 4 other doctors that could pick up the things, that wasn't his mindset. He just is like, no, this is my work to do. And I'd love to go to Oregon and see in your family, but you can come see me. That was kind of how he was organized. So he showed me in those very long-term kind of thorough commitment to presence and always generosity and always vitality. He loved to drink sake and laugh and play with his grandchildren. He had wanted to become a pediatrician when he was first studying, but his friend who was an OBGYN said, well, why do you want to be a pediatrician? He said, well, because I love children. And he said, yeah, but if you become OBGYN, you will be with children in suffering a lot. Why don't you try being a person who brings them into the world? And so he went on a rotation for being an obstetrician gynecologist, and he really liked it. So that's why he did that. So he loved children. He was always playing with my daughters and their cousins. And anyway, so that kind of long-term quality of his life was there. But he also taught me in a very direct and pointed way. And if you're lucky enough to ever have someone like this in your life, please bow to them. You don't have to wait till they pass away to do it. And it has to do with Azusa, my wife, and I getting married. We'd asked to be married twice. Once when I was 18 and once when I was 19. She was 19 and 20. She's 1 year older than me. And the reason that we had asked is because we were deeply in love and we wanted to get married. We knew we didn't need to get married right then, but there's these little things called visas. And it kind of messes up your romantic life if you can't be in the same country. And so we had fallen in love while we were on student visas, and we were doing that. But now, she was graduated. She had gone back to Japan. I was in university. I was there for a year on a student visa, but I wanted to stay there longer. I couldn't, and she couldn't just come to the United States. It was really difficult. So we'd asked to be married. And he was very kind, but just like, you got to be kidding me. And now, as father of 3 daughters, super get it. What are you even talking about? But he didn't shame me or just send me out to pasture or anything. But there is this other thing called pregnancy, which has a way of shifting the dynamics. And I don't recommend unplanned pregnancy as a way to convince your father-in-law. But in my case, it worked out. So I was 20 and Asa was 21, and the baby that we would later name Anzu was in her belly. And everyone knew this, but it's wonderful, as families are, how you can just all know something and not talk about it because it's too challenging, which I appreciate. I think is actually a good, can be a good thing. But at some point you need to face it, right? So for the first week after this all became clear, I would go over to their house for dinner every day. We would sit, we'd eat dinner, the TV would be on, no one would talk. Dinner would be over, we'd turn the TV off. Azusa and I would sit in a formal, like if you're going to talk about something important, you sit, it's called seiza. You sit with your kind of in a kneeling posture, and we would sit, and then we would say, Father, we have something important to talk with you about. And everybody knew what that was, right? And he would sit for a while, and he would stand up and go to his room. Mm-hmm. And he didn't kill me. I imagine that's what he was practicing each of those days. And he did that every day for a week. Yeah. And the last night he didn't get up. And he sat there for a very long time. And he was sitting, we were sitting like this facing him, which is formal like that. And so, if Genki was him, we were here like facing like that. And if we were Genki was facing him. He was faced this direction, kind of leaned on the table. He wouldn't look at us. And then after a long pause, he looked at me, but out of the side of his eyes. If you've ever been looked at, the side of your eyes, it has a certain quality. And he turned to me, and he looked me right in the face, and he said, "Do you love her?" Which is not a question that would be common from a Japanese father in this situation. And I said, "Yes, I love her." He said, "Look at this woman sitting next to me." It was Azusa's mother. She bore her in her womb, and we have raised her for 20 years, caring for everything. What do you know of love? It was like just right down to the depths of my belly. I knew that he was right. I know that knowing what love is was cheap. And I could sense his wisdom. He knew enough about love to know that it couldn't be known. It couldn't be known in the way that my youthful hubris was asserting it. Now, is that youthful hubris necessary? I think so. I'm not too hard on myself. I'm glad I had that kind of passion and conviction. But I'm more glad that I met someone who was willing to share that with me very, very honestly in one of the most nitty-gritty kind of moments of a life. Do you love her? You know, for 34 years now, that question has stayed in my mind. That I can't just know the answer to that in an abstract way or as a one-sided report about my feelings, but that love has to be enacted through commitment and through care, especially becoming a father. You know, I've told this story many times, and sometimes I wonder, you know, I don't want to give people the wrong idea that I think that any of this is likely to work out. Now, I'm not recommending unplanned pregnancies. I'm not even recommending marriage. I'm not recommending fatherhood. I'm not recommending any of it. You know, it's all completely fraught. And many, many times it doesn't work out. And the form itself can be a problem because we get magnetized to the form and we think, well, that's what good people do, or that's what I'm supposed to do, or whatever. That can all be a huge, huge, huge problem. I want to point to something more fundamental, which is life has a shape. It is not abstract. And that shape much comes to us through cultural configurations. It comes through formations of relationship and society, etc. That's always in flux. But that's not an excuse to not take care of it. Right? We need to take care of it. And our religious traditions are part of what give us a system. They give us forms. They give us an invitation to explore something and to explore commitment. Again, it's not about how much zazen do I sit, what's my frequency or whatever, but with what heart do you come back to the fundamental commitment of your life, which is just living. And that the things of your life are important, the people of your life, the responsibilities, that those all call you into something greater than yourself. They call you beyond the limitations of a life that's just defined by your inner drives. There's a writer named Wendell Berry that many of you may have heard of before. I'm very fond of him. He lives on a farm in Kentucky. He's lived there for a long time. He's been married for a long time. And he's a poet and a farmer. And he does these wild things, like write essays about poetry, marriage, and farming, which is so cool, right? He kind of in these essays, this is a book called Standing by Words, I highly recommend it. He says, I'm talking about marriage here, but I'm actually talking about farming. And then along the list of ways, but farming is basically poetry. And the three of them are just intertwined in a beautiful way here. And there's something I just really love about that. When he talks about marriage, for example, he doesn't shirk from talking about sexuality and passion, which oftentimes when we get to the marriage part of it, we're just talking about, well, what's my commitment? As if sex wasn't part of it. Right? And that's fundamentally part of it. And so the passion that he brings there is reflected in the poetry and reflected in the responsibility to the land if you're somebody who lives in place and with the abundance of the earth. Anyway, so I just want to read you a couple things. Again, I'm not even recommending marriage here. Keep that in mind. I'm talking about marriage, poetry, farming, life, practice, form, awareness. These are all different names of commitment. So this comes from the beginning of a essay called Poetry and Marriage, the Use of Old Forms. This is the opening paragraph. It says, the meaning of marriage begins in the giving of words. We cannot join ourselves to one another without giving our word. And this must be an unconditional giving. For in joining ourselves to one another, we join ourselves to the unknown. We can join one another only by joining the unknown. We must not be misled by the procedures of experimental thought. In life, in the world, we are never given two known results to choose between, but only one result that we choose without knowing what it is. Let me read that last part again. We are never given two known results to choose between, but only one result that we choose without knowing what it is. You know, one of the things about reading from someone that's such a profound writer is it's hard to give any interpretation. So let me just read a couple more little bits and then tell you why I think it's important. This comes from essay in this collection is called Standing by Words, and this is an essay called Standing by Words. He's talking here a little bit about how people live in the future and how that's a problem. No one actually lives in the future. It's a deserted place, the future, he says. What can turn us from the deserted future back into the sphere of our being, the great dance that joins us to our home, to each other, and to other creatures, to the dead and to the unborn? I think it is love. I am perforce aware how boldly and embarrassing the word now lies on the page. For we have learned at once to overuse it, abuse it, and hold it in suspicion. But I do not mean any kind of abstract love, which is probably a contradiction in terms, but particular love for particular things, places, creatures, and people requiring stands and acts, showing its success or failures in practical or tangible effects. And it implies a responsibility just as particular, not grim or merely dutiful, but rising out of generosity. This is what my father-in-law taught me. It's a particular love. Do you love her? You feel like you love her, but what does that demand? What does that require? To take care of particular things, which are not always the things that you're inspired by in the moment. And here's the last thing. I wrote this, when I first read it several years ago, I wrote it on the paper and stuck it on the front gate because I was so blown away by it. It may be then that form serves us best when it works as an obstruction to baffle us and deflect our intended course. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. Nothing like a poet, right? But to come to our real work, to come to the edge of what we know is not the uncommitted. The only way to that place is through commitment. And again, I don't mean commitment just as a covenant that is, through a period of time, but the commitment of living, to paying attention to what is here. How the great mystery of the universe is showing up as the embodied things of this life, whether they're physical, emotional, spiritual. They can exist on all kinds of levels. I'm not just talking about a kind of materialist reduction here. I'm talking about the phenomena that make up a life. What you call a life, what you call living, in a way, is phenomena after phenomena after phenomena after phenomena. In every instant. Phenomena is kind of a cold word, right? But love the phenomena. They become your family. They become your teachers. They become your community. They become the earth that you live on and with. So this not knowing that Wendell Berry points at, which is at the root of commitment, is a kind of joining together, which is where the word commitment originally comes from. Right? To come together. It's not a fleeting experience, right? But it is a return again and again. It's a way. This is the classical term within East Asian Buddhism. It is the Tao. It's beyond you, and yet it's also your walking. And that's what practice is inviting you to. A fidelity to your own stepping. But that stepping doesn't happen in isolation. It happens as a symphony of being. When you sit Zazen, we come back to Zazen here. It's very easy to think about commitment is I'm mustering the energy and the concentration to get back on the cushion again and again and again. That's absolutely necessary. You have to do that. Right? And it could feel very one-sided, just like going to the gym or whatever else is that you do, you decide in your life. Brushing your teeth. Well, brushing your teeth is fairly low bar, although people get pretty excited about brushing their teeth, flossing, and my daughters have those ones that go wing like that, and all the kind of thing. But even if you spent as much time just sitting in meditation every day as you did brushing your teeth, it will revolutionize your life because you can't ignore the ungraspable breath. If you just take a few moments and say, oh, I'll have to put down my preoccupations, my singular preoccupations and abstractions of what life is, and pay attention to what's here. There's a whole concert which you're a part of continuously. That's what will keep you going. Just like in a marriage. What keeps you going is returning to the mystery of each other. Not knowing who your partner is. I mean, it's best if you recognize their face, right? But you don't know that, right? And that is what keeps you there. And I get, when I kind of wax eloquent or kind of sappy about marriage, I get that like lots of them, if not most of them, don't work out. And that doesn't mean they're not worthwhile, because they're training in you in that. Whether that particular promise to each other is able to be fulfilled for a lifetime or not, that's a separate question. But regardless of it, whether it is or not, it's training you in this. Just like many things in our life, we may change, may shift, but the fundamental requirement of living doesn't change or shift. If we go all the way back to some of the earliest Zen writings, there's a writing called the Koson Shukugoroku, which basically means how could you say? The abiding words of ancient honored ones. That would be a kind of, and in this there's a famous series of lines that's talking about Zazen that points at how we get so confused about what Zazen is. Is trying to wake us up from that. And some of you may have read it before. A lot of different translations. Alan Watts was fond of this. I think that's the first place I read it, in The Way of Zen. When you learn Zazen, it's for learning how to sit Buddha. If you learn Zazen, Zen is not sitting or lying down. If you learn sitting Buddha, Buddha is not a set form. Since there is no home of Dharma, it does not respond to taking or throwing away. If you do sitting Buddha, it's precisely killing Buddha. If the sitting form is attended to, the principle is not reached. So to learn Zazen is a much higher bar than to just learn how to sit still. It's to learn sitting Buddha. It's to learn awakening. It's to practice awakening, the total aliveness of our being, which mostly we can't see that way. We see in some refracted and reduced way. It's our karma. Don't worry about it. But it's something to work with. He says if you learn Zazen, if you really learn what Zazen is, it's not sitting or lying down. You can't call it just sitting there, right? You can't define it as this thing which you got taught to do when you came to Introduction to Meditation, or you're in a meditation class somewhere or something like that. That's not what Zazen is, right? It's not sitting or lying down. If you learn sitting Buddha, Buddha is not a set form. If you're really learning this total aliveness of being, which we call Zazen, there's no set form for that. Since there is no home of Dharma, it does not respond to taking and throwing away. The Dharma, the truth, what the Buddha woke up to, it doesn't abide anywhere, in exception to other places. So how could you get it? Or how could you throw it away? It's not possible. It's already you. It's a jewel that you already are, not even that you have. So if you do sitting Buddha, right? If you just enact sitting Buddha, I'm going to sit Buddha, that's killing Buddha. Right? You just get rigid. If you carry out the sitting form, or you become attached to the sitting form, you will not reach the principle. Now, I think the reason Alan Watts was attracted to that is because he didn't sit Zazen. But that's the wrong message. That actually means the opposite. That's the invitation to the form. The form is an open system. It's not a rigid thing. It is the quality of your own being. And people have been sitting in this particular form for a really long time because it has stability. It can teach you upright, relaxation, integrity, presence. But not everyone can sit this way, or wants to sit this way, or will sit this way. It's not the point. And furthermore, you won't sit this way all the time. Even if you're sitting a lot, it will be for a couple hours a day. And then there's all the other things that you're doing. Huh? Like getting married, writing poetry, farming, taking care of kids, or whatever your life looks like. So all of those things are what Zazen is about. And yet, if we don't commit to particular forms that appear in our life, it's very hard to uncover that vitality. And so Zazen is one form. There's many, many, many forms, many spiritual traditions. But this is one of the reasons we don't try to get people to sit meditation too much. Because that's something that when it's time for you to come to, you do. And for some people that will become the central activity. For other people it won't. But if it is something you feel drawn to, which if you're here there's a good chance that that's the case, then I would encourage you, explore this very treacherous gate of commitment. And by commitment I mean say, okay, for this period of time, I'm just going to do this thing. I'm going to stop paying attention to my whim, right? I'm going to just say, I'm going to come back to it because it is a gateway to what is actual. And I'm going to trust it in that way. And then a period of that time, it doesn't have to be a till the death do we part commitment. It can be a 3-month commitment, or a 1-month commitment, or a 1-week commitment. And then when you're sitting on the cushion for a period of time, it can be a 20-minute commitment, right? But explore that, because it allows you to let go of the way in which just you're navigating by whatever your immediate feeling of understanding is, as opposed to being invited into this world that's beyond. So how's that for a big wind up on the practice term starts in 2 weeks. And a practice term at Buddha is a time, or 3-month period every spring that we set, where it's not so different than other times in the sense that there's full slate of retreats and classes and assemblies of all different kinds. You're welcome to come to almost everything that's on there without any particular commitment. Okay? And that's great. But I would encourage you to think about during that time, how might I commit? how might I think about this period of practice? It's a roughly 90-day period, where I say, I've been wanting to meditate on a regular basis for a long time. Maybe what I'll do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to meditate 6 days a week. I'm going to meditate for at least 10 minutes a day, and I'm just going to do that for 3 months, and it's going to challenge me, right? But the commitment then becomes a kind of gateway in the way that I'm talking about it. This morning, keeps you pressed up against something. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you. If you'd like to become, there's a thing called a term student, and term students have particular requirements for the amount of meditation and attendance and other things. You can find all that information on the website. And if you get the bulletin, you should have received that already, and it'll go out again. But that's a good way. That's a good package, but it doesn't fit everybody. But it's one way to do it. So all of this is a little bit wind up to that. Any questions or comments?
Hojo.
Hi.
Obviously, you answered the question, and you've shown through great examples of a father and a husband. But in that moment, when you showed that, I was like, "What did you say?" Because that was when you were young. So, what happened in that moment? What happened?
Yeah, I was humbled.
Oh.
And to be 20 and to be humbled is an unbelievable gift. Especially if you're, I came in with a certain amount of hubris.
Yeah.
and that was a really unbelievable gift that my father-in-law gave me. Yeah.
Well, obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, you've shown that. So you just said nothing?
I received it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I received it.
Wow.
And then he had certain things he wanted us to do.
Yeah.
I wanted to stay in Japan, and I had a pretty good job teaching English, and I knew that I could support us on some level doing that. I knew if we came back to the States we wouldn't. So our plan was to stay in Japan, and then I would teach English and and he was like, "No, you are not a person of society yet. In Japan, that's really important. A term called shakaijin." And that means that you've landed in some kind of a profession. You've landed in it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but you've committed yourself to it. So same thing, like if you work at a company, you can be what's called a part-timer, which doesn't mean you're working part-time. It just means you haven't committed. Or you can be, it's like what the literal translation is, like a true company person, which means you've committed yourself to that. And when you do that, then the company takes care of you and you take care of the company. That's the traditional way. It's starting to break apart now. Until you become that, you just have no right to becoming a father, getting married, all that kind of stuff. You have to become a person of society. So he said, you need to go back to the US and finish your degree and become a person of society. Until then, you will not cross the threshold of my house.
Okay. Yeah, I see.
But then our beautiful daughter was born, and then Anzu and Azusa is our daughter, and Azusa were going back the next summer. We were back in the States. I went back to college. He was helping support us do that. And they went back for the summer, and he's like, "Oh, where's Patrick?" That's my birthday. Yeah. And Azusa was like, "You told him not to." And he was like, "Oh, what are you talking about? I never said that." And it was like the baby just broke open his heart. So now as a grandfather, I totally get it. Totally get it. So I got a lot of early points for just for this beautiful baby. But yeah, and he really. When we went at our wedding, we didn't have a whole marriage ceremony, but we had a reception. Yeah. And I remember his speech. He said, for those of you who are Japanese or know something about Japanese culture, he said, "Akai kutsu o hakaseta oboe ga nai." He said, "I don't recall having put red shoes on my daughter." And that's a reference to a traditional song in which when the GIs were in Japan, they oftentimes will marry Japanese women, and then the Japanese women will leave and their family never sees them again. basically. That was, how it was then. And so there's this song, like a lament of a father whose daughter leaves wearing red shoes to go to America and never, comes back. So he thought that this meant he was losing his daughter. But in these last few, months of his life, since 2 years ago, she's been going back and spending a month or so. And we went back all through when my kids were little. So he was really surprised, I think, that he got to have that relationship. And when I would see I would call, and we have the thing now called FaceTime. Is that FaceTime? And then I would see his face when she was there, and it was like, please stay as long as I was always encouraged to stay longer, because I knew how important it was. Yeah, and I got to see him one last time. I was there the beginning of January, and so in his wind down, we should all be so lucky to have a wind down and be surrounded by people that we care about and care about us. But last I had to leave. I had work to do, to go to the head temples and things like that, and so I was leaving Sendai, and I went to him and said, I have to leave now. I have to go to work. And he knew it was the last time we would see each other. I was keeping some ideal life that it might not be. And he said, thank you. And I don't mean this to just be some kind of emoting about my own life, but maybe as an example of how things can be, even when we're committed, oftentimes they don't go like that. But when they do, pay attention to it in all the little ways that you get feedback about how your investment in others and in living and in what you can't capture for your own, how it enriches your life. And it doesn't enrich your life in the way that just getting what you want enriches your life. It enriches your life in a much deeper and profounder way. That's what tradition is trying to invite us into, not because it owns that, but because people who have experienced it are trying to say, this is the real gold, this is the real gold. And that's why we try to replicate something that we have done. But of course it has to become your own. Okay, one more.
The question is about that.
Yeah.
Set forms.
Yeah.
And how do you know when it's time to evolve or iterate?
A form that is really engaged has such a spaciousness within it that in the full embrace of that spaciousness, a shift can come. But until that time, we're meddling. And so, I always kind of mess with my colleagues by referring to my colleagues who I'm close with. I always refer to as, I say, well, we're the kind of the conservative ones, and I hate that because most of them are super liberal, right? It's like, I just hate that word. But I think it's really the wisdom of a conservative mindset that says, my first I don't mean politically conservative, but a conservative mindset that says, my first thought is not how do I change this to suit my circumstance, but the mind that says, let me engage what I've received, and with the intention to taste that deep spaciousness of what this form has to offer me. And from there, something can shift a bit. And so I think like when people come to Budai temple, oftentimes people think, oh, it's very classical. You know, like, oh, it's so Japanese there. Sometimes people will say that to me. And I'm like, whoa, you should go to Japan. Oh, not Japanese there. I mean, there's some things which we mark as Japanese. And why is that a problem? Also, you know, it's like, it's such a, you know, we have plenty of Americans who are from Japanese descent, and they carry the part of that tradition, or part of that cultural heritage, exactly. But also, but the kind of care for something that we've received is really important, and that then leads to, you know, like maybe an international family, which would have been unheard of, you know, a couple decades ago. You know, it was really special. Since I'm telling stories about my life, I guess I'll just say this to you. My grandfather, my wife's grandfather, on her mother's side, Azusa took care of him while he was dying. And he was very involved in the war effort, and his whole city was completely destroyed in firebombing. He lived right there. It was right in the middle of all of that. The burning down of his whole world. And Azusa was his favorite. In Japan, you're allowed to have favorites. Here it's a little bit frowned upon, but Japan is kind of like very natural. He had named her Azusa, which means catalpa. He said that catalpa, they made bows, like a bow and arrow bows from catalpas in Japan, and he wanted her to be flexible but strong. And so he named her Azusa. He and his and her grandmother were very fond of her all the way through. Well, she goes to Japan, you know, that was really hard. Or she goes to the U.S. That was really hard. You know, they couldn't see her very much. But we came back and visited, and we decided to come back and live there because she wanted to be closer to her grandparents. She knew that they were getting close to passing away. And so she would go to take care of him every day. And who would she bring with her? She'll bring Anzu, who is this child that is, you know, biologically and spiritually and familially from both sides of the Pacific. And I still have this image of him laying in his bed, you know, towards the end of his life, and she's there playing at his feet. And it was like, oh my God, stuff changes. Yeah, and through a certain kind of attention to each other, there can be a new form that comes about. So that's what I trust. And sometimes, you know, you just have to do it differently. Yeah, that's also true. Okay.